The first thing Nathan Voss remembered was the smell of antiseptic and cold plastic tubing. Not his wife's perfume. Not the warmth of her hand finding his. Not the sound of her voice cutting through the white noise of a hospital corridor. Just the antiseptic, sharp and chemical, clinging to the inside of his nose like something borrowed from a chemistry lab, and the faint pressure of an oxygen cannula resting against his upper lip. He blinked. The ceiling above him was the specific shade of off-white that only exists in institutional spaces, not clean, not dirty, something in between, like a decision that was never fully committed to. A water stain in the shape of a partial continent spread across the tile panel directly above his head. He stared at it for a long time before he understood where he was. Mercy General. Room 4C. What he knew this because a nurse had appeared at the edge of his vision and told him so, in the practiced, efficient tone of someone delivering information rather than comfort. Her name tag said Patricia. She had dark circles under her eyes and a coffee stain on the inner wrist of her left sleeve that she'd tried to cover with her cuff. Mr. Voss, good morning. Do you know what day it is? Not a question. A clinical prompt. He told her it was Thursday. She corrected him. It was Saturday. He had been unconscious for approximately 31 hours following emergency spinal decompression surgery, during which the neurosurgical team had relieved compression on his L3 and L4 vertebrae caused by bone fragment displacement from the fracture he had sustained on the mountain at Vale. The window for the surgery had been narrow, 12 hours, and they had told whoever had authorized the procedure. Beyond 12 hours, they could not guarantee neurological outcome. 12 hours. He processed this the same way he processed everything, methodically, without panic, filing the numbers into the correct column. He had been on the mountain when it happened. A blue run, nothing aggressive, just movement for the sake of movement because he had needed to clear his head before a board call the following Tuesday. The other skier had come from his left, out of a blind bend, going too fast, and the impact had been immediate and total. He remembered the crack of it. He remembered the cold of the snow against his face. He remembered thinking, with a kind of detached clarity, that this was a significant structural problem. He remembered very clearly, and pulling his phone from his jacket pocket and calling his wife. Serena had not answered. He called twice. He texted. He called their home line, which no one ever used, just to try something. And then his vision had started narrowing from the edges, and a ski patrol volunteer was crouching over him, and after that the chain of memory simply stopped. "Is my wife here?" he said. Patricia consulted something on the tablet she was holding. A small, precise hesitation. The kind of hesitation that exists when a person is choosing between two different versions of the truth. "We weren't able to reach her at the time of admission," Patricia said. "We had your emergency contact on file, Dr. Gregory Voss, your brother. He was present for the surgery." Nathan said nothing. "He's in the family waiting area now. Would you like me to send him in?" "Yes." Patricia left. Nathan turned his head slowly, testing the resistance of the neck brace they had fitted him with. He looked at the window. It was morning, gray and flat, the kind of sky that looks like it has been rubbed out and redrawn. A bare tree outside the glass pressed one branch against the pane as the wind moved it, a dull, rhythmic tapping. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor was beeping in a slow, steady pattern that had nothing to do with him. His wife had not been here. He let that fact sit in the room with him, the way you might let a newly discovered structural defect sit in a report, acknowledging it, measuring it, not yet deciding what to do about it, but establishing, firmly, that it was real. Greg came in 8 minutes later, in the 8:20, and he had Nathan's jawline and their father's eyes, and he'd been awake for too long. Nathan could see it in the way he moved. Slightly over-careful, the way people move when they've been sitting in fluorescent light for too many hours and have drunk too much bad coffee and have passed through the stage of fear and arrived somewhere on the other side of it, at a kind of exhausted relief. He pulled the chair to the side of the bed and sat down without ceremony. "You look terrible," Greg said. "You drove down from Seattle." "I was already in Denver for a conference, 40-minute flight." Greg folded his hands in his lap. "They called your emergency contact, Nathan. I was on a plane inside 90 minutes. The particular weight Greg placed on the word they spoke everything that neither of them said next. "Where is she?" Nathan said. But Greg was quiet for a moment. He pressed his thumbnail against the knuckle of his index finger, a habit he'd had since childhood. "Lake Como," he said finally. "I found out through Delia. Delia saw her post a story on Saturday morning. She was at some private villa outside Varenna." He paused. She wasn't alone. Nathan looked at the ceiling, at the continent-shaped water stain. "When did she leave?" "Wednesday night. You went to Vail on Thursday morning." "She knew I was going." "Yes. She knew the trip." "Nathan. She put her phone on airplane mode." "I know. I was on the mountain for 40 minutes before anyone found me. The surgery window was 12 hours, and I was 4 hours from here by ambulance, and she had her phone on airplane mode." Greg didn't say anything. There was nothing correct to say, and Greg was a practical man who understood this. He didn't reach over and put his hand on Nathan's arm. He didn't offer a platitude. He just sat there, which was the only useful thing a person could do in that room at that moment. Nathan breathed through his nose. The antiseptic smell had settled into something more like furniture, present, ambient, no longer sharp. He was alive. His legs worked. The neurosurgeon had confirmed motor function that morning during the initial post-op assessment. He was in moderate pain, managed. He was housed in a reasonable room in a hospital with good lighting and a nurse who had offered him water twice. His spine had been repaired, and in 4 to 6 months, with aggressive rehabilitation, he would be functional. He had his brother sitting to his left, and his mind, which was the most critical asset, it was entirely intact. He had lost nothing he could not rebuild. He filed the facts about Serena into a separate column. "Does she know?" he said. "I texted her. She read it." Greg's voice carried something careful and precise in it, something that told Nathan he was watching for a reaction. "She hasn't landed yet. She's on a flight back. She'll be here tonight, maybe." Tonight? His surgery had been Thursday afternoon. It was Saturday morning. She would be here tonight, maybe. He parsed the word maybe. It was doing significant structural work in that sentence. He let it go. "Go get some sleep," Nathan said. "Take my hotel room. I have a reservation at the Beaumont through Monday." "I'm not leaving." "Greg!" "I'm not leaving until you're stable, and they've confirmed the nerve function holds." That's non-negotiable." Greg looked at him directly, the way he always did when he was finished discussing something. "Is there anything you want from outside? Coffee? Food that isn't whatever this is?" Nathan looked at the meal tray a nurse had set to one side. Pale broth, a single cracker. "Real coffee," he said. "Black. Whatever they have that isn't a chain." Greg left to find it. Nathan turned his face back toward the window. The branch was still tapping. The sky was the same gray. He thought about Serena in a villa in Varenna, in the precise corner of Lake Como, where the light hits the water at an angle that makes the whole lake look like something from a painting, because she had been there before and had described it to him exactly that way. He thought about her reading Greg's text, and he thought about what her face must have looked like when she read it. Not grief, not terror, but something more like inconvenience, the expression of a person whose schedule has been unexpectedly disrupted. He did not feel what he expected to feel. He had expected the cold, crushing weight of betrayal. He had expected something violent and destabilizing. But what he actually felt, lying in that hospital bed with the cannula against his lip, and the branch tapping at the window, was something quieter and much more precise. It was the particular stillness that arrives when a complicated situation finally reveals its true shape. When the numbers in a report stop contradicting each other and suddenly resolve into a single, coherent picture. He saw the picture clearly. He began, in the careful private architecture of his own mind, to make plans. Serena arrived at 9:47 p.m. on Saturday evening. Nathan had been moved out of post-op recovery and into a private room by then. Greg had gone back to the hotel at 7, after the attending physician confirmed stable neurological function, and Nathan had told him, in a tone that brooked no argument, that there was nothing more to be done tonight. The room was quieter now. The night nurse, a young man named James, who said perhaps 30 words per hour and moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that presence does not require performance, had checked his vitals at 9 and left him to the dark and the low hum of the building's ventilation system. The door opened. Serena Voss was 41 hours post-villa, and she still smelled like someone else's sunscreen. The trace of it was faint. Right underneath her perfume, sandalwood and citrus, something she'd bought in Milan 2 summers ago. But Nathan had spent 12 years studying anomalies in financial documents, and he knew what a discrepancy looked like, even a small one. She was wearing a cream blazer over a dark silk top, her carry-on in her hand, her dark hair in the kind of careful disorder that takes 20 minutes to arrange. She looked, objectively, beautiful. She had always been beautiful. That had never been the problem. She crossed the room and set her bag down, and put both hands on the bed rail, and looked at him with an expression that was constructed from 4 distinct components: genuine distress, practiced guilt, the residue of a long flight, and underneath it all, like a watermark visible only when held to a certain light, relief. Relief that he was alive, yes, but also relief that he was merely alive, that this had not become something larger, something that would require a different kind of reckoning entirely. "Nathan," she said. Her voice was low and textured, and she had been crying recently, or had done something to her eyes to achieve the same effect. He looked at her. "I'm so sorry," she said. I had my phone off for the flight, and when I landed and saw Greg's message, I came straight to the airport. I got the first, 'Sit down, Serena.'" She sat in the chair Greg had occupied that morning. She set her hands in her lap. She was watching him with the particular attentiveness of someone trying to read a room before committing to a strategy. He said nothing for 37 seconds. He counted them. "Who was with you?" he said. She blinked once, carefully. "I went with a group, us, Lena and some friends from the gallery. I'm not going to do this tonight," Nathan said. "I'm not going to sit in this bed and listen to you build a structure you and I both know won't hold. I'm asking you once, directly. Who was with you?" Serena looked at her hands. "Ethan was there." "Ethan Cole?" "Yes." "Your trainer." "Nathan, how long?" She pressed her lips together. A muscle in her jaw moved. He watched her process the question, assess the available exits, and then, in a move he had not fully anticipated, She made the pragmatic choice that told him everything he needed to know about who she had become. She told the truth. 14 months, she said. 14 months. He was in this bed because she had been unreachable. And she had been unreachable because she had been in a villa in northern Italy with a man she had been sleeping with for 14 months. He had fractured 2 vertebrae and spent 31 hours unconscious and faced the realistic possibility of permanent neurological damage, and the surgery window had been 12 hours. 12 hours. He let the number sit. "Okay," he said. Serena looked up. The word had confused her. She had expected something else from him. Anger, grief, the specific kind of controlled devastation that husbands produce in these moments, the thing that would let her perform the contrition she had been rehearsing on the plane. She had not expected okay. "Get a hotel room tonight," he said. "You're not staying here and you're not going back to the house until I'm discharged." "Nathan, I want to—" "I'll let you know when I'm discharged." He closed his eyes. "You can go." She left. He heard the door close behind her, and he listened to the ventilation system and the distant beeping of a monitor somewhere down the hall, and he thought about 14 months. He thought about what 14 months looked like in financial terms. 14 months was 59 weeks. It was roughly 420 days. It was the kind of duration that leaves a trail. He made a mental note to call his accountant first thing Monday morning. Then he slept. The next 4 months were the architecture of everything that came after. He spent the first 3 weeks in the hospital and then in a rehabilitation facility in Cherry Creek, where a physical therapist named Marcus, who had played collegiate wrestling, came to his room every morning at 7 and spent 90 minutes doing things to his spine and legs that were occasionally painful and consistently necessary. Nathan worked through the pain with the same methodical focus he brought to a complex audit. Not ignoring it, not catastrophizing it, simply accounting for it and moving forward. By the end of week 3, he was walking with a cane. By week 6, without it. During those weeks, he made calls. The first was to Diana Osei, his forensic accountant. Diana was 53, had short natural hair going gray at the temples, and had the professional temperament of someone who had spent 3 decades finding what other people had tried to hide. She did not ask personal questions, she asked financial ones. And he gave her the information she needed, and she began to work. The second call was to Raymond Kessler, who was his attorney of record, and also, in practical terms, one of the best divorce litigators in the state of Colorado. Raymond had a face like a closed door and a reputation for being precise in ways that other attorneys described as clinical and Nathan described as correct. He explained the situation to Raymond over 45 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon while doing his second set of assisted walking in the corridor of the rehab facility, phone pressed between his ear and his shoulder. Raymond listened without interruption. When Nathan finished, there was a pause. "The prenuptial agreement," Raymond said, "has an infidelity clause. Walk me through it." Article 7, subsection B. That in the event of documented marital infidelity by either party, the defaulting party forfeits their right to any claim on assets acquired prior to the marriage and relinquishes their right to claim marital home occupancy during proceedings. They retain claims only on assets demonstrably co-created during the marriage, subject to forensic audit. Another pause. "You wrote that agreement yourself?" "I had it written. I reviewed every clause." "And you have documentation?" "I will have documentation," Nathan said. "Diana Osei is building it now." Raymond made a sound that, from anyone else, might have been a laugh. "Tell her I need everything with dates," Raymond said. "Not just the account transfers. Hotel records if there are any. Shared digital subscriptions, recurring payments. Anything that creates a timeline. Courts love a timeline. What, Nathan? A timeline with transaction receipts is a story even a disengaged judge can follow. She knows, Nathan said. How long do you need before we file? Nathan thought about this while he walked the corridor, the linoleum floor stretching ahead of him under the flat facility lighting, the distant sound of someone's television from behind a closed door. 4 months, he said. From today. I need the assets in the right positions, and I need Diana's full report. That's your timeline. That's my timeline. He hung up and kept walking. The picture that Diana assembled over the following 8 weeks was the kind of thing that, in a professional context, Nathan would have found almost artistically elegant in its audacity. In a personal context, it had the particular quality of cold water, clarifying, final, a stripping away every ambiguity until only the shape of the thing remained. Serena had been, for the past 14 months, conducting a secondary financial life with a degree of competence that suggested either prior experience or Ethan Cole was more strategically minded than a personal trainer turned gallery consultant had any right to be. She had established a private account with a bank in Connecticut that neither Nathan nor any of their shared financial advisors had any connection to. Into this account, she had been transferring funds, consistently, at irregular intervals to avoid pattern detection, drawn from the household management account that Nathan funded monthly and that Serena had full administrative control over. The household account had been Nathan's deliberate gesture of financial trust in their marriage. Well, he had given her a generous monthly allocation for the management of the home, entertaining personal expenses. He had never audited it. He had never asked for receipts. This had been a decision based on the assumption that the marriage was what he believed it to be. The monthly transfers to the Connecticut account averaged, according to Diana's reconstruction, $7,400. Over 14 months, this was approximately $103,600. In addition to the direct transfers, there were 11 instances of cash withdrawals from the household account ranging from $2,000 to $5,500 each, totaling $38,200, for which no corresponding receipts or documentation existed. There were 2 wire transfers that Diana had flagged as requiring closer examination. One for $18,000, dated 9 months ago, made to an LLC registered in Delaware, whose sole registered agent was Ethan Cole. One for $12,500, 4 months later, to the same entity. The total, including the wire transfers, was approximately $172,300. Nathan read Diana's report on a Thursday evening in the apartment he had rented in Lodo after leaving the rehabilitation facility. The apartment had clean lines and good light, and he had furnished it with exactly what he needed, and nothing he didn't. He read the report twice, front to back. Then he set it on the kitchen counter and made coffee, real coffee from the Italian press he'd had since graduate school, and stood at the window with the mug in his hand, and looked at the city lights below and thought, for approximately 4 minutes, about nothing at all. Then he called Diana. "The LLC," he said. What is it registered as?" "A consulting company," Diana said. She was eating something. He could hear the faint rhythm of it, the professional equivalent of working through lunch. "Cole Endeavors, LLC, filed 13 months ago in Delaware. Current registered address is a mailbox service in Denver. Active accounts. 1 business checking. The wire transfers from your household account are the only documented income. There's no client roster, no invoicing structure, no operational footprint. It's a holding vehicle. That's my reading. Can you get me the full account history on the LLC? Not directly, I'd need a subpoena, or your attorney would. But I can get you the public filing history and cross-reference it with the financial trail from your household account. That's more than enough to establish the pattern, Nathan. So attorneys don't need the LLC's internal records to tell the story. They need the outgoing transfers and the registration date. A Delaware LLC filed 13 months ago, 1 month before the first wire transfer, with no apparent business purpose. That tells its own story. He thought about this. Article 7, subsection B, he said, half to himself. Sorry. Nothing. Send Raymond the full report, everything with dates. Already drafted. I'll send it tonight. He hung up and set the phone face down on the counter. He finished the coffee. He looked at the city. He thought about Serena in that villa, in that specific quality of light over the lake, with her phone on airplane mode while he was on a mountain in Vale, with 2 fractured vertebrae and a 12-hour window. He thought about 14 months of careful transfers, in about a Delaware LLC, about $172,300. He thought about the fact that she had looked him in the eye, in that hospital room, with his neck brace and his IV line and his controlled post-surgical pain, and told him Ethan had been there the way you admit to a minor social transgression, as if the duration and the financial architecture were details she hadn't thought to mention. He went to bed at 10. He slept without difficulty. He was a man who had learned early in his career that productive rest is itself a form of strategy, and that the clearest thinking is done after a full night's sleep and before the first distraction of the day. He woke at 5:30 and went to work. The asset restructuring took 8 weeks, and it required the kind of careful, methodical attention to corporate structure that was, in practical terms, was Nathan's native language. He had spent 15 years as a forensic financial investigator and corporate asset consultant. He had built his career by understanding exactly how assets moved, how they were shielded, how they were hidden, and how they were exposed. He knew the architecture of financial protection, the way a structural engineer knows load-bearing walls, not theoretically, but viscerally, in the specific muscles of professional practice. The prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause was clean and well drafted and would hold. Raymond had reviewed it 3 times and confirmed this. Under Article 7, subsection B, Serena's documented infidelity, documented by Diana's report, by the hotel records Raymond had already begun subpoenaing, was by the existence of the Delaware LLC established 1 month before the first wire transfer, meant she forfeited her claim to assets acquired prior to the marriage. Nathan's premarital assets were substantial. He had built his career before meeting Serena and had been disciplined about keeping those assets properly documented as premarital. The firm he was a named partner in, Voss Meridian Financial Group, had been founded 4 years before the marriage. His investment portfolio, managed separately, was primarily premarital in origin. The house in Cherry Hills Village was premarital, purchased 2 years before the wedding. The deed held in his name alone, a fact that Raymond described as elegant foresight. What Serena had a legitimate claim to under the terms of the prenuptial, absent the infidelity clause, were assets demonstrably co-created during the marriage. This amounted to a joint savings account with approximately $240,000, one investment account opened jointly after the wedding with approximately $180,000 in current value, and her personal assets, her car, her personal property, her clothing, her art collection, which was significant and which she had built herself during the marriage through her gallery work. The infidelity clause, once triggered and documented, eliminated her claim to the joint investment account. The documented misappropriation of household funds, $172,300 over 14 months, transferred to a personal account and to an LLC controlled by her lover, created a counterclaim that Raymond was structuring to offset the joint savings account claim entirely. On paper, once the filing was complete, Serena would be leaving with her personal property, her art collection, her car, and whatever remained in the Connecticut account. The art collection had value. She was not destitute. But she was also walking away from 6 years of marriage to a man who had, by any objective measure, provided her with a life of considerable material comfort, and she was walking away with precisely the portion of that life that she had built with her own hands. Which was, Nathan believed, the correct accounting. The corporate restructuring was a different matter. Serena sat on the board of 3 of Voss Meridian's advisory entities, a fact that had made sense when he'd brought her on as a nominal director 4 years ago, primarily for estate planning purposes, and that now required careful unwinding. Under Colorado business law, and her removal from these advisory boards required either her consent or a formal vote by the other board members. Nathan had begun those conversations quietly, 4 weeks in advance of any filing, with the 2 other voting partners at Voss Meridian. Both had agreed, without drama or public comment, that a board restructure made sense in the current context. The paperwork had been drafted and was sitting in Raymond's office, ready to execute. He also had a private meeting with the managing trustee of his family trust, a structure his father had established in 1989, and that Nathan had maintained and grown considerably since taking over as trustee 8 years ago. The family trust held assets that predated the marriage by decades. It was not, under any reading of Colorado marital property law, a marital asset. But Nathan had the trustee review the documentation and confirm the isolation of those assets, and he had the confirmation in writing before he proceeded. He was thorough. He was always thorough. The one variable he had not yet fully accounted for was Ethan Cole. He thought about Ethan Cole the way you think about a structural problem that is not load-bearing but is still worth understanding. Cole was 32. A former personal trainer who had transitioned, via Serena's professional connections, into work as a gallery consultant, which, in practice, meant that Serena brought him to events, introduced him to clients, and included him in conversations he had not earned the professional right to be part of. The Delaware LLC suggested that Cole had, at minimum, must been a willing participant in receiving funds he knew were not legitimately his. Whether he had initiated the scheme or Serena had, and he had simply accepted the benefit of it, was a question Nathan found less interesting than the answer to whether the LLC created legal exposure for Cole directly. He asked Diana this question on a Wednesday morning over the phone. "Directly," Diana said, meaning yes or no. "Directly." The LLC received wire transfers totaling $30,500 from an account that your wife had administrative authority over, but that was funded by joint marital assets, in a context where there's no documented business relationship between Cole's LLC and you or your wife in any legitimate capacity. In a civil context, that's unjust enrichment. In a more aggressive reading, depending on Cole's level of awareness and participation, and it might look like something closer to conversion. Conversion, Nathan said. He knew the term, the civil tort equivalent of theft, taking someone else's property without permission and converting it to your own use. It's a stretch to the criminal definition, Diana said carefully. But the civil claim is real. Raymond would know better than me on the litigation strategy. Nathan made a note. He did not file a civil claim against Ethan Cole. He decided against it, not from any sentiment about the man, but from a purely strategic position. A civil action against Cole would generate publicity, and publicity at this stage would complicate the asset proceedings and give Serena's attorneys a narrative to work with. Cole was, in the final accounting, a secondary consideration. The primary objective was clean, complete, and documentable. But he kept the unjust enrichment analysis in the file. He had found, in 15 years of forensic work, that information you do not use immediately is not information you waste. It is information you store. The filing happened on a Tuesday in early April. Raymond's office submitted the divorce petition to Denver District Court at 9:14 a.m., along with a supporting brief that included Diana's forensic accounting report, the hotel and travel records establishing a documented timeline of the affair, the Delaware LLC registration documents, and a formal notice invoking Article 7, subsection B of the prenuptial agreement. Nathan was at his office when it was filed. He was reviewing a due diligence package for a client acquisition. A mid-size Denver-based logistics firm that a private equity group was considering buying. Yet he read through the cash flow projections with the same focused attention he'd given everything for the past 4 months. At 9:32, Raymond texted him a single line. Filed. Clean entry. Nathan replied, Acknowledged. He set the phone aside and went back to the due diligence. Serena was served at 11:05 a.m. at the Cherry Hills house, which she had been living in alone since Nathan's discharge. She called him at 11:23. He did not answer. She called 3 more times. She texted twice, long, urgent messages that he did not read. She called Greg, who had been briefed and who said simply that Nathan's instructions were that all communication should go through Raymond Kessler's office. She called Lena Park, her closest friend, who called Nathan's number once, received no answer, and then, presumably, called Serena back with that information. And he received a call from Serena's attorney, a man named Darren Flood, who had a reputation as an aggressive litigator, and who led with the classic opening move of claiming that the prenuptial agreement had been signed under duress and without adequate legal review. Raymond noted the claim, requested the documentation supporting it, received no documentation, and filed a response that spent 11 pages demonstrating that Serena had retained her own independent attorney during the prenuptial drafting process, that the process had taken 3 weeks, and that Serena had requested and received 2 amendments to the original draft before signing. Duress was not a viable argument. Flood knew it, Raymond knew it, and the quiet that followed from Flood's office over the next 10 days confirmed that they were recalibrating. And Nathan paid attention to this the way you pay attention to a financial negotiation, tracking the rhythm of it, the pauses, the places where the other side was retreating and gathering resources for a different approach. The different approach came 3 weeks later, and it was Serena herself who made it. She came to his office. He found out from his assistant, Clara, who was 28 years old and had been with him for 3 years and had the professional composure of someone twice her age. Clara appeared at the door of his office at 2:40 on a Thursday afternoon and said, in the tone she used, when she was conveying information that required him to prepare himself, Serena Voss is in the lobby. She doesn't have an appointment. She says it's personal. Nathan considered this. Give her the small conference room, he said, and tell her I'll be there in 10 minutes. He took 12. He finished the paragraph he was reviewing, made a note in the margin of the document, closed the file, and stood. He was moving without the cane now, fully, and without adjustment, the physical recovery substantially complete. He buttoned his jacket, which was a dark charcoal that had been recently pressed, and walked down the hall. The small conference room had a glass wall facing the main corridor. Through it, he could see Serena before she saw him. She was standing, not sitting, a choice that read as either nervousness or assertion, probably some compound of both. She was in a charcoal wrap dress and low heels, and she had her hands clasped in front of her. Her hair was down. She looked, as she always looked, put together, but her jaw was slightly set, and there was a tightness around her eyes that spoke of weeks of poor sleep. He opened the door and went in and stood on the opposite side of the table. She had clearly planned an opening. He could see it in the set of her chin, the controlled intake of breath. But something in the way he looked at her, or rather the way he didn't, the simple fact of his complete absence of visible emotion, disrupted whatever she had prepared. "You didn't have to do it this way," she said. He said nothing. "We could have talked. We could have figured out Nathan, we were married for 6 years. You could have at least—" "I gave you the opportunity to talk," he said. "You had 41 hours between reading Greg's text and walking into my hospital room. You came with a story about a group trip and a phone on airplane mode. I asked you once, directly, and you gave me a version. I said I wasn't going to do it that night. I meant I wasn't going to perform the conversation you were prepared for. I was not indicating I wouldn't do anything at all." Serena pressed her hands flat on the table. "You had people following my finances. I had people reviewing our finances. There's a distinction. You had someone building a case before you even— I began a financial review in week 2 of my rehabilitation. That is correct." He let that settle. "Diana's findings, not my instructions, are what shaped the legal approach. The facts structured the strategy. That's the way it generally works." $172,000, Serena said, and her voice cracked slightly on the number. "Not with guilt," he noted. "What with the specific frustration of someone who has been caught in something they believed was carefully concealed. Nathan, I can explain. Darren Flood's office has our contact for communications. Anything you want to explain to Raymond." She looked at him. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, and something changed in her face. The performance of it receded, and what was left underneath was rawer and harder to categorize. Not exactly remorse, more like the recognition, arriving slowly and with some resistance, that the landscape had permanently shifted, and no amount of conversation in this room was going to reshape it. "You're not going to hear me out," she said. "I heard you out on a Saturday night in February, when I had a neck brace and an IV line. You told me 14 months, and you told me his name, and then I asked you to get a hotel room. I've heard everything I need to hear, Serena." She picked up her bag from the chair. Her hands were steady. He noted this, the steadiness. She had composure. She had always had composure. It was one of the things he had admired about her once, and it was precisely the quality that had allowed her to run a 14-month parallel life without breaking character. She walked to the door and put her hand on the handle. "Your lawyer is very good," she said. She wasn't looking at him. "I know." She left. He went back to his office and finished the due diligence review. The divorce proceedings ran 7 weeks, which Raymond described as fast, which it was, a function of the prenuptial's clarity, the forensic documentation, and the fact that Flood had correctly assessed the strength of Nathan's position and had advised Serena, ultimately, to negotiate rather than litigate. The negotiated settlement tracked almost precisely with Nathan's original outline. Serena retained her personal property, her car, her art collection, and the funds in the Connecticut account, minus a negotiated offset of $42,000 against the joint savings account claim accounting for the documented household fund misappropriation. She received nothing from the premarital asset pool. The house stayed in Nathan's name. The investment accounts were resolved with Serena receiving a minimal portion of the jointly created account after the infidelity clause adjustments, an amount that Raymond framed as a gesture of resolution rather than a legal concession. And the advisory board removals had been completed 2 weeks prior to the final settlement. The family trust documentation was in order. Cole Endeavors, LLC, and the unjust enrichment analysis went back into the file. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in June. Nathan signed the papers at Raymond's office at 3 p.m. in a room that smelled of old leather and printer toner. Raymond's assistant brought coffee that was objectively excellent, and Nathan drank half of it while reviewing the final documents, and then signed each page where flagged and handed the pen back, and that was the end of 6 years. He felt the same thing he had felt in the hospital room when Serena had walked in smelling of someone else's sunscreen. Nothing violent, nothing destabilizing, just the particular clarity that arrives when an accounting is finally completed, when every column has been reconciled and the final sum is clean. He thanked Raymond and went downstairs to the car and drove to the office. He had a 4:30. What happened in September was not, strictly speaking, part of the plan. Or rather, it was not part of the legal plan. The legal architecture had been completed in June, and it was clean, and it held. But there was a dimension to what Serena had done that lived outside the legal framework, and that Nathan had been, for 7 months, quietly and methodically addressing on its own terms. Serena's professional life was built on reputation. She had spent 8 years constructing it. The gallery connections, the curatorial relationships, the specific credibility she had accumulated in Denver's art community as someone with genuine taste and reliable judgment. This reputation was, just in practical terms, her most valuable asset, more valuable than the Connecticut account, more valuable than the art collection, because it was the engine that generated everything else. The gallery where she served as senior curator, Vantage Contemporary, was a mid-tier but highly regarded space in the Rhino Arts District that specialized in emerging and mid-career regional artists. Serena had been there for 4 years. She had brought in 11 shows in that time, 3 of which had generated significant critical attention, and 2 of which had resulted in major acquisitions by institutional collectors. Her relationship with Vantage's director, a woman named Petra Hollis, who had short silver hair and strong opinions about natural light, was the professional foundation of her current life. In September, Vantage was set to open its most significant show of the year. A solo exhibition by a New Mexico-based painter named Carlisle Ruiz, whose large-scale work had been gaining serious national traction and who Serena had been cultivating for 2 years. It was the most prominent show Serena had been attached to in her career at Vantage. The opening was a Saturday night event, with an expected attendance that included collectors from New York, a critic from Art in America, who was flying in specifically, and 3 institutional representatives from major Denver collections. Nathan had known about the Ruiz show since January, before anything had broken apart. He had heard Serena talk about it the way she talked about things she was genuinely excited by, not performing enthusiasm but actually lit up by it, and the specific quality of energy she had when she was doing work she believed in. He had listened to her talk about Ruiz's work over dinner in November and thought at the time that she was excellent at her job. He still thought that. This was not about her professional competence. It was about the fact that in the Denver art world, as in any small professional community, reputation is a function of trust. And trust, in a professional context, is a function of what people know about you. And in the months since the divorce filing, Nathan had been very thoughtful about what certain key people in that community had come to know. He had not run a campaign. He was not a man who ran campaigns. He had done something more precise. He had had conversations. He had lunch with Petra Hollis in August. It was an easy lunch to arrange. They had met socially over the years, in the way spouses of professionally active people accumulate adjacent connections, and Petra had sent him a brief note of condolence after the divorce filing had become known, the kind of measured professional courtesy that signals genuine regard without drama. He had responded and suggested lunch, and Petra had agreed. They met at a quiet place in Cherry Creek, not a power lunch venue, just a good restaurant with good food and proper spacing between tables. Petra was perceptive and direct, and Nathan liked her, in a professional sense, for both qualities. He did not need to manufacture the conversation. He mentioned, over the main course, that the forensic accounting in the divorce proceedings had been particularly detailed. Yet he said this not as a complaint, but as an observation. The way you note the specifics of a complex deal without editorial judgment. He said that the financial review had identified certain patterns of fund management during the marriage that had been instructive, and that one of the outcomes of that review was his better understanding of how his household finances had been administered. Petra was not a naive woman. She heard what he was not saying, with the precision of someone who had spent decades reading subtext in professional relationships. She asked carefully whether the patterns were relevant to Serena's professional conduct. Nathan said he had found no evidence of anything improper in Serena's strictly professional activities. He said this clearly and without qualification. He was not going to misrepresent a fact to damage someone professionally. He simply was not. But he did say that his forensic review had also revealed the extent of Serena and Ethan Cole's financial arrangement, the Delaware LLC, the transfers, and that Cole's gallery consultant work had been facilitated largely through Serena's professional relationships, which meant that there were client relationships in the Vantage context that might, if examined carefully, reflect the interplay between personal and professional priorities. He suggested that Petra might want to quietly review the paper trail of any deals or client relationships where Cole had been involved in any advisory capacity. He did not tell Petra what to find. He simply told her where to look. He left it there. He paid the check. He thanked Petra for her time. He went back to the office. He heard from Greg 3 weeks later. Greg had maintained a loose social connection with 2 people in Denver's art community through a friend of a friend, that there had been a conversation at Vantage. A quiet review. 2 client relationships in which Cole had been tangentially involved had been examined more closely and found to contain documentation irregularities. Nothing criminal. Cole had not had the access for anything criminal. But the kind of procedural sloppiness that happens when someone who should not be in a professional space is nonetheless occupying one, and the person who put them there has a conflict of interest significant enough to compromise their oversight. Petra had, according to the conversation Greg had heard about, had a private meeting with Serena about the Ruiz show. So the specifics of that meeting Nathan never knew directly. He didn't need to. The Saturday opening of the Carlisle Ruiz show happened on a warm September evening. Nathan was not there. He had not been invited, and he had not sought to attend. He had spent the evening at a quiet dinner with 2 colleagues and their spouses at a restaurant in Lodo, and had eaten well, and talked about things that had nothing to do with art or divorce, and had come home at 10:30 to the apartment that was now functionally his. He poured a measure of scotch and sat in the chair by the window, the city below him, and read 50 pages of a book on corporate governance that he had been meaning to get to for 6 months. His phone buzzed at 11:48 with a text from Greg. The text said, "Just heard. She wasn't there tonight. Petra ran the opening without her." Nathan read this once. He took a drink of scotch. It was smoky and clean, and the finish went on for a long time. He replied to Greg, "Good." Then he set the phone face down on the side table and went back to his book. 2 days later, his assistant Clara forwarded him a segment of the Denver Post's arts blog, not the paper itself, but the subsidiary digital coverage that tracked gallery events. The Ruiz opening had been reviewed briefly, with the kind of measured critical language that means a show has done exactly what it needed to do, neither under nor overreaching. The show's success was attributed to the gallery and to Ruiz's work. Serena's name did not appear in the piece. A week after that, Greg sent him a longer note. What he had heard from his source that Serena's role at Vantage had been restructured. She was still with the gallery, but in a reduced capacity, no longer leading curation, moved into an associate role that Petra had apparently framed as a mutual decision and a reallocation of responsibilities. The Ruiz show's critical period would be managed by Petra directly going forward. Nathan read the note. He filed it. He did not feel satisfaction in the way the word is commonly understood, the warm, vindicated glow of someone who has watched their enemy fall. He felt something quieter and more precise, the sense of a balance sheet that now, finally, reflected the accurate underlying reality. The numbers matched the facts. The accounting was correct. He had not destroyed Serena. He had not attempted to. She had her art collection, but which had genuine value. She had her Connecticut account. She had her career, reduced but present. She was not broken. She was simply no longer in possession of things she had not earned. That was the correct outcome. Ethan Cole, in October, quietly dissolved Cole Endeavors, LLC. The Delaware filing was updated online, and Nathan noted it the same way he noted any change in a public record, without commentary, without particular feeling. He added it to the file and closed the file. The last thing that Nathan did, in the full accounting, was the most methodical and the least dramatic. In late October, he drove out to Cherry Hills. The house was the same house. Ivory brick, deep-set windows, the old oak tree on the left side of the front walk that he had always intended to have assessed by an arborist and never had. The lawn had been maintained by the service he'd continued paying since the divorce, because the house was his asset and he maintained his assets. He had not been back since February. He had not needed to come back. Everything of value to him had been removed by his attorney's team during the property settlement. He parked in the drive and went in with the key and walked through the empty rooms. The house smelled of nothing now, which was the absence of her. Her scent was gone. The furniture they had chosen together in certain rooms had been divided cleanly according to the settlement. Some gone with her, some left, and what remained had been moved or covered. He walked through the kitchen, where the morning light came in the same way it always had, across the countertop and down to the floor in a long, flat diagonal. And he walked through the study where he had spent hundreds of hours at the desk. He walked down the corridor. In the main bedroom, the built-in shelves along the east wall were empty where her things had been. He looked at the wall for a moment. Then he went to the window and looked out at the garden. It was autumn, and the trees were nearly done, the last of the color just holding on, the kind of pale gold that precedes brown. The garden had been her project more than his. She had put in the raised beds along the south wall in the second year of their marriage and had grown things there every summer. Herbs, some vegetables she talked about far more than she actually harvested. One summer, a specific variety of dahlia she had sourced from a specialty grower in Oregon. The beds were empty now, turned over for winter, and he looked at the garden for 3 minutes. Then he went downstairs and locked the house and drove back to the city. There was a period, from November through to the following February, approximately 3 months, that Nathan thought of not as a recovery period, but as a recalibration. It was not linear. It had nothing to do with processing grief or arriving at acceptance, or any of the other frameworks that the self-help industry constructs around the dissolution of long relationships. He had not lost something that was his. He had recovered something that was his. His financial integrity, his professional reputation, the clean and unambiguous architecture of his life, by correctly accounting for what he had actually possessed for 6 years and what had merely appeared to be there. He worked. He ran his company, which was performing well, with the particular momentum that comes from a leadership team that is clear-eyed about its capabilities and honest about its constraints. He recruited a new junior partner, a woman named Ingrid Sato, who had come from a forensic accounting background at a Big Four firm, and who had the quality he valued most in professional collaborators. She showed her work. In December, he traveled to London for a client meeting and then to Tokyo for a conference on emerging regulatory frameworks for cross-border financial investigation. And he found, in both places, that the work was the same caliber of interesting it had always been, and that his capacity to engage with it was fully intact. Greg visited for Thanksgiving. They cooked together in the Low-Do apartment, which had a kitchen substantially smaller than the Cherry Hills house, and ate at the table Nathan had bought from a second-hand shop on Colfax in September, a heavy old thing with uneven legs that he'd had balanced properly before buying. They drank whiskey after dinner and talked about their father and about Greg's work in Seattle and about nothing in particular. Nathan did not talk about Serena. Greg did not ask. In February, on the 1-year anniversary of the surgery, Nathan drove to Mercy General. He parked in the visitor lot and went into the building and found Patricia at the nurses' station on the 4th floor, where she was working the morning shift. She remembered him. Nurses generally remember the significant cases, the ones where the window was narrow. He thanked her without elaboration. For the professional care she had given him during that period. She said it was her job. He said it was more than that. She looked at him steadily for a moment, and then said something he thought about later. She said, "You healed clean." He thanked her again and went back to his car. He sat in the lot for a moment with the engine running. Healed clean. It was a medical term, a technical descriptor for a wound or a surgery that has resolved without complication, without infection, without the scarring that can limit future function. It meant the structural repair had held. It meant the tissue had returned to something close to its original integrity. It did not mean the damage had never happened. It meant the damage had been accounted for and addressed, and that what remained was capable. He thought this was a reasonable accounting. Yet he pulled out of the lot and joined the flow of morning traffic, heading back toward the office. The city was gray and flat in the February light, the mountains just visible to the west, the specific white of winter snow on their tops. He had a 9 o'clock with a new client, a family office dealing with a complex intergenerational asset structure that needed untangling. It was the kind of work he was good at. Patient, detailed, requiring the capacity to hold the full complexity of a situation in his mind without losing the shape of it. He had that capacity. He drove west on Colfax into the gray morning light and thought about the 9 o'clock. In the full ledger of everything that had occurred, the final entry was not a moment of triumph or a scene of witnessed devastation. It was something more structural, and, in its own way, more complete. It was the kind of ending that only becomes visible when you step back far enough to see the whole document. A man who had been at the narrow edge of a 12-hour surgical window, who had been left there by the person who should have been reachable, who had healed and stood up and walked out of the rehabilitation facility with a cane, and then without one, and who had then done what he was trained to do. He had examined the facts. He had documented the pattern. He had built a structure that reflected the accurate underlying reality. And then he had gone to work. There was, in the weeks that followed that February morning, a detail that completed the picture with the kind of precision that Nathan had always appreciated in a well-structured report. It was not information he had sought, and it arrived the way most accurate information eventually arrives, through the ordinary flow of professional networks and professional reputations, through the specific way that truth moves in small communities of people who are all, to some degree, watching the same space. He heard it from Clara. Clara had a former college roommate named Jess, who worked in commercial real estate, and who had a client base that overlapped, tangentially, with Denver's arts community. Jess had mentioned something to Clara in passing, the way people mention things that seem too specific and too emblematic to not repeat. Clara, who had the judgment to know what was relevant and what wasn't, had mentioned it to Nathan on a Tuesday afternoon in March, in the brief window between his 3 o'clock and his 4. She stood in the doorway and said, what with the professional neutrality that was her default register, "I heard something you might want to know. I don't know if you want to know it. Tell me." Cole Endeavors. LLC had been dissolved in October, but Ethan Cole himself had, in the months following, encountered certain professional difficulties of his own. With the gallery consultant work gone, Serena's professional network was now functioning without him by deliberate architectural design. He had returned to the fitness industry. He had applied for a position at a high-end wellness facility in Cherry Creek, where he had previously worked before reinventing himself as a consultant. The facility's ownership had conducted a standard reference check. In the course of that reference check, they had contacted 2 previous employers and 1 business reference. The business reference, one of the gallery connections through whom Serena had introduced Cole professionally, had, it appeared, recently had a conversation with a financial investigator they trusted who had mentioned certain patterns of documentation in the Cole Endeavors LLC structure. The wellness facility had decided not to move forward with Cole's application. Nathan listened to this. He said nothing for a moment. "Does Jess know why you told me?" he said. "She knows I work for you," Clara said. "She knows the general situation. She thought you'd find it, she said, satisfying, but I think she meant relevant." He thought about it. "Thank you, Clara." She nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind her. He sat for a moment with the information. He thought about Cole. 32 years old, a Delaware LLC dissolved, and a consulting career that had existed primarily as a vehicle for someone else's household funds. He thought about the wellness facility and the reference check, and the specific way that one documented conversation with one trusted financial investigator had moved through a professional network and landed in a place that changed an outcome. He had not made that call to damage Cole. He had made it to document an accurate picture for Petra. The fact that an accurate picture, accurately documented and correctly shared with the relevant people in the relevant professional community, had consequences that radiated outward. That was not strategy, exactly. That was simply the way accurate information behaves. It moves. It finds its level. It settles into the spaces that have been waiting for it. He checked his watch. Was the 4 o'clock would be arriving. He opened the file on his desk. There was, in the spring of that year, one more conversation. The last one that mattered, the one that had the specific weight of final things. It was at a mutual friend's gallery opening in April, 3 months after the February drive to Mercy General, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Nathan had not expected to see her there. He had confirmed the event with the host, who was a professional contact more than a social friend, and had gone because the artist was someone he had a genuine interest in. An older painter whose large format work dealt with industrial landscapes in a way Nathan found visually honest. He was standing with a glass of water near the back of the gallery when he saw Serena across the room. She was with a woman he didn't know, and she was wearing dark green, a color she had always favored, and that suited her. She looked well. She had the quality of someone who had been through a difficult period and had come out of it changed, but functional, which he recognized because he had been through the same process and presumably wore it the same way. She was looking at a painting when he first saw her. Genuinely looking at it, not performing interest for anyone's benefit. She had always been genuinely good at looking at paintings. She noticed him 10 minutes later. There was a moment, a fraction of a second, the duration of a single breath, where something moved across her face. Not a performed response. Something more involuntary than that. He watched it happen and couldn't have named it precisely. It was too compound, too layered. Just carrying the residue of everything that had happened between the hospital and the divorce and the gallery and the long intervening months. She crossed the room toward him. He waited. She stopped 6 feet away. The correct distance for a conversation you've already decided to keep brief. "Nathan," she said. "Serena." "How are you?" "Well," he said. "You?" "Well?" Around them, the gallery murmured with the ordinary sounds of a Friday opening. Quiet conversations, the soft movement of bodies, the occasional clink of glass. The painting on the wall behind him was a power plant rendered in pale ochre and gray, the cooling towers given a strange, almost architectural dignity. The sky above them the same non-color as the sky outside Mercy General on the February morning he had first opened his eyes. "I heard about the firm," she said. "The expansion, the new partner." "Ingrid, she's good." Serena nodded slowly. She had her glass in both hands, loosely, a habit she'd had for years. Is it what you wanted? The direction it's going?" "Yes," he said. "The direction it's going is what I wanted." She heard the 2 layers in that sentence. He could tell by the way her eyes moved, a brief, almost imperceptible adjustment, the internal recalibration of someone parsing a statement that says exactly one thing and means precisely something else. She was quiet for a moment. "I should have been there," she said. Her voice was low and level, not theatrical, not performing remorse, just stating a fact she had arrived at through her own accounting. "I know that isn't enough. I know there isn't a version of saying it that makes it—" She stopped. "I was in Italy. My phone was off. You were on a mountain with a 12-hour window and I was in Italy." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "Serena!" His voice was not cold. It was not warm. It was the voice of a man who has finished reviewing a document and closed the file. "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once. The small, precise nod of a person accepting a closed door. I should get back, she said. Enjoy the show. The work in the East Room is the best thing in the gallery. She turned and walked back across the room. He watched her go with the same even attention he gave everything, complete, present, and entirely without remainder. He turned back to the painting of the power plant. He looked at it properly, the way she had been looking at hers when he first spotted her across the room. And he thought the painter had done something honest with the light, had rendered the industrial scale of the thing without either condemning it or romanticizing it, had simply looked at it and put down what was there. He finished his water. He thanked the host on his way out, confirmed a lunch in 2 weeks, and walked out into the April evening. The street was lit in the warm amber of the last hour of daylight. A couple walked past him with a large dog on a slack lead. Somewhere nearby, a restaurant had its kitchen exhaust running and the smell of something cooking. Garlic, oil, something roasting, reached him on the slight breeze. He walked to his car. He had a board call at 8 the next morning, a full day of meetings on Thursday, and on Friday afternoon, for the first time in over a year, he had booked a day in the mountains. Not Vale. A different resort, on a different range, a trail he had never been on before. He got in the car. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel and the engine off, and the April light coming through the windshield in a long diagonal. Then he started the car and pulled out into traffic, heading home.
But like my wife and I, we try to like introduce him to like all types of music. Like he really likes the Beatles, Tool. No.
Hostile attack confirmed on Alpha.
Yeah, man, he was super impressive with the Lorax. You guys have nailed it right there. Thanks, man. Yeah, he's a good kid. Super cool dude. I am definitely proud of how he's turning out.
At our position. Get ready to defend the sector.
He's super fucking funny. Like last night